It really is great to have you come to our 4th annual conference on the integrity of creation that celebrates the spirit and mission of the university. My name is Professor Jerry McGill, and I'm the chair of the conference. We have a splendid conference committee of faculty from all over the university. We have Spiritans from all over the globe here today joining us tonight and tomorrow. And it's my privilege to introduce our own university president, Ken Gormley, to give you a welcome to the university. Ken?
Thanks very much, Jerry, and good evening to everyone. I have the privilege of serving as the 13th president of Duquesne University of the Holy Spirit. And I want to begin by thanking Jerry for all of his great work in organizing this program. Each year seems to get better and better, and so Jerry, we're deeply grateful for all of the work and creativity that went into this program. And welcome all of you to this Integrity of Creation Conference, which is truly a world-changing scholarly initiative, now in its 4th year. It's great to see many of our Duquesne community family here, but also I welcome those of you who are just visiting for the first time our beautiful campus and visiting our beautiful city as well. And also to those who are joining us by live streaming, the live streaming video, people all across the world, including areas in Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America. We're honored and privileged that all of you are here with us tonight. And I'd like to extend a special welcome to our esteemed panel of experts who are truly top-notch in every way, to our visiting Spiritans, including Father Jude Norum from the General Provincialate in Rome. Where's Father Jude hiding? There he is, Father Jude. And also Father John Kilcran from the Provincialate in Ireland. Father John, welcome. And especially our distinguished Spiritan Pierre Jubenville, 4th Bishop of the Diocese of San Pedro Apostol in Paraguay. Bishop, we are honored to have you with us, and he will tell us more about his journey and his mission in that part of the world in due course. This year, as you know, our focus is on global sustainability. As educators here at Duquesne University, we seek to prepare young men and women not only to succeed in their chosen careers, but also to make a positive life, a positive difference in the lives of others. And I'd like to recognize, incidentally, the work of a group of seniors from Central Catholic High School whose wonderful posters are on display here in the room in there. You should have a look at them when you have a chance. The students and their teachers will be joining us tomorrow, but it's a wonderful addition to this conference. But we do consider this topic to be of particular importance, sustainability, here at Duquesne. I mentioned to one of the speakers on a personal note, my daughter Rebecca graduated from the MBA Sustainability program here and is gainfully employed at PNC's Sustainability Office. So in my own family, we've seen the significance of this important field and the fruits of the labors of those who have really turned it into a world-class piece of education. Each year, this conference explores themes, as you know, that are set forth in Pope Francis's encyclical on the environment, Laudato Si, which implores us to care for our common home. Pope Francis asks us what kind of world we want to leave to those who come after us. It's our responsibility to respond and to act, especially within the context of higher education as we set a course for the next generation of leaders, of students, and others who will guide the future of this planet that we make our common home even after we leave. Over the next 2 days, we will call on experts to share information about the emerging science and research that empowers us, and more importantly, empowers our students to be good stewards of God's creation. Most of you know the history, but for those of you who are new to us, it was 140 years ago this year that the Spiritan founders built Duquesne University on this bluff overlooking the three rivers of Pittsburgh. At that time, their mission was to educate recent immigrants and their children who were working mainly in the steel mills and the factories up and down the Mon Valley where I grew up, to give them opportunities. And today, we learn about the effects of industry and our own daily habits as we try to better understand the damaging carbon footprints that we've left and continue to leave behind us. We are proud here in Pittsburgh that this once smoky city that lots of people still visualize that way is now considered one of America's most livable cities. Things have changed and continue to change for the better. There are plans, for those of you who aren't from Pittsburgh, to develop a new eco-innovation district that is literally right behind us on the corridor of Forbes and Fifth Avenues connecting downtown Pittsburgh to Oakland. And we're thrilled to be playing a leadership role in this exciting new plan to develop and improve our environment where we live here, support the needs of existing residents, expand entrepreneurship and job growth, and play a true leadership role in sustainability for this region that will leave the next generation a better place. And some of our students and faculty, Professor Robert Schroff and others, have been actively involved in these efforts already. Here at Duquesne, we're deeply committed to sustainability in all of its many forms. It's an inherent part of our mission. As I mentioned, our MBA in Sustainability, which my daughter Becca attended, that program was recently ranked by Corporate Knights, a first-rate publication, as #1 in the nation and #5 in the world. We're constantly looking at ways to reduce our own carbon footprint and to be vigilant stewards of the environment. Among other things, we have our own energy center here with cooling and heating that has been in place for 20 years, long before it was fashionable. But still, even though we are vigilant, we've just scratched the surface. Both here in Pittsburgh, in our community, and around the globe, there is still a lot of work to be done, and it has to be done together. Pope Francis implores us that we have to make our own efforts to get to the next level, especially for the sake of future generations, because they're going to encounter new, life-changing, unimaginable technologies and industries that we can't even today, as fast as things have changed in the past decade or so, can't even imagine. And these new challenges will confront our planet in ways that we can't conceive right now. So this evening, we're going to hear from Paul Shrivastava. Is that how, say that correctly, Paul? Shrivastava, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer and Director of Sustainability Institute at Penn State University, who will set the stage for us. And Paul and I had a chance to talk over dinner. He just has a remarkable career and background. And as we're going to learn, we're at a critical time. We've actually, in many ways, veered away from millions of years of somewhat predictable evolutionary history, during which forces of nature helped to shape the course of humanity and the environment. And now human impact, our own decisions, our own actions in our own industries, in our own homes, is the primary influence, for better or worse, on where we, and we as a family on this planet, are heading. So our keynote speaker tonight, our distinguished keynote speaker, will emphasize how we can all play a constructive role in shaping our future. The stakes are high, and as we'll hear from Paul and from other speakers in this conference, we have a moral, ethical, and even faith-based reason as a Catholic spirit and institution of higher education to take this extremely seriously. Our discussion begins tonight and will continue tomorrow morning as we're challenged to think even more deeply about sustainability on a global scale. We'll consider, too, how religion shapes our human responses to environmental changes, which makes this program, as Paul and I were talking about, truly unique among many across this country and across the globe. And we'll gain new perspectives from around the globe, from environmental ethics in China, where development has often negatively impacted access to clean water, air, and soil, and to the reflections of Bishop Pierre Jubenville as he shares a deep understanding based upon his own experiences of the people and the land of Paraguay. We will also discuss the widespread effect of industrialized agriculture and climate change on food security, an increasingly important topic, and how the lack of quality drinking water in some of the world's harshest environments devastates people of these communities, and how that directly impacts each and every one of us as brothers and sisters of each of those individuals in broader family. And, you know, here at Duquesne, we've had an initiative, Pure Water, and worked with individuals in other countries to deal with that pure thirst, I think it's called, to deal with those problems. But it is something that is increasingly our concern that we have to take upon ourselves. As a lawyer and a law professor, I was attracted to Duquesne, it's now 24 years ago, largely because of the exciting interdisciplinary energy and the collaboration among our faculty and our students among the schools, and the rich network of connections that link this special campus to like-minded scholars and colleagues all over the country, all over the world. That for me was just an eye-opening thing as a young scholar, and it has been part of what has shaped me throughout my career. These interconnected qualities, I believe, are on full display in this stellar lineup of topics and speakers that we're going to hear about in this magnificent conference and conversation. Again, thanks to Jerry McGill and all of the folks who have helped to organize it. At a time when many of these issues have become politically charged, Duquesne is pleased to provide a forum for thoughtful, reasoned discourse, civil discourse, something that I've tried to emphasize very much since the day I took over this office, because it is inspired by the Spiritans' call to preserve the integrity of God's creation in a respectful manner. So may you learn and grow together tonight and tomorrow. Regrettably, I have another event tonight. I'm going to try to stay for a little bit of Paul's talk, but I have to be downtown, and then tomorrow we are, one of our community engagement groups is co-hosting a very big event involving the August Wilson House. But I hope that you're enlightened and encouraged by your work, and may you return to your home, whether it's here in Pittsburgh alongside the rivers here, or thousands of miles away that some of you have traveled in distant parts of the globe, strengthened by your resolve to help to protect our planet and each other, guided as we always are here at Duquesne University, by the Spirit who gives life. Thank you very much and have a wonderful conference.
Thank you, President Gormley, for such visionary comments and inspiring remarks. Wonderful indeed. It's now my honour to introduce a name mentioned by President Gormley, Professor Robert Shroof, who holds the Murrin Chair in the Palumbo Donoghue School of Business, to introduce our speaker. Bob?
All right, I promise I'll be the last introduction of the night. Thank you all for being here. Welcome. I have the honor to introduce to you tonight Dr. Paul Shrivastava. And in that context, I want to say a few more things about him than what we've already heard. So the backstory is that he's really a triple threat. In terms of academics, he's an academic scholar teacher. He has significant entrepreneurial experience and senior management experience. And these three things are really hard to come by in most individuals that fill these types of positions. We're glad to have him here tonight also, as was mentioned before, the Chief Sustainability Officer at Penn State University, also the Director of the Sustainability Institute, and Professor of Organizations at the Smeal School of Business. So again, three more things. There's sort of this trifecta going all the time with Paul. He can't do just one thing at a time. He has more things going on than you want to imagine. He also leads the International Research Chair of Art and Sustainable Enterprise at the ICN Business School in Nancy, France. And Paul, if I may use a first name, received his PhD here in Pittsburgh at University of Pittsburgh. He's since traveled to NYU Stern School of Business and New York University, Bucknell University, also been at Concordia University in Montreal, on his path then back to Penn State now and landing back in Pennsylvania. He has founded the organization An Environment Journal, published by SAGE, which I just published something in, I think, this summer by chance. So thank you for launching that, right? So others like myself can get into this. He was a founding chair of the Organization in Natural Environment, or what's also called the ONE division of the Academy of Management, which now is one of the fastest growing divisions of the Academy. It has really taken off with scholars from all universities and all walks of life around the world. He has, in this context, also looked at and helped start, I guess, the management team and helped launch the Hindustan Computer Limited, one of India's largest computer companies. He's also was the founding director of Future Earth, which we'll hear a little bit more about tonight. And in his spare time, he's also been a triathlon coach and is very passionate about Argentine tango. In this capacity, I think he actually helps others like myself and you in the audience and the rest of us at academic universities figure out how to dance together, right? To try to find a triple bottom line, if you will, performance opportunity in the future, combining environmental, social, and financial performance in our capital expenditures to look at new opportunities for how universities can be learning laboratories for the future. And it's within that context that I'm pleased to be able to welcome Paul to Duquesne University and to the stage to help share some of his insights tonight.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Robert, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by thanking Ken Gormley for this opportunity for creating this conference. The topic of global sustainability is front and center today. I'm going to share with you some of my thinking on what this means, why we need to do this now, and how universities, what special role can universities play in our move towards sustainability. Also want to thank Jerry McGill for organizing, for inviting me. After a lot of difficulty in arranging the schedule, I'm really delighted to be here in Pittsburgh, a city that is very near and dear to my heart. It's the city where I landed as an immigrant exactly 40 years ago this month, to start at a PhD program at the University of Pittsburgh up the street. It's a city that I met my future wife, to whom I've been married for 40 years. It's the city where my daughter went to college. So there are lots of reasons why I want to be in Pittsburgh all the time. And so I'm really delighted to be here to share with you what I've been doing over the last few years. In the time that has passed, the last 40, 50 years, has been a very special time, not just for me and my family, but for the entire human race. And what I want to do in this talk is, if I convince you of one thing by the end of my talk, what I want to convince you of is that we are living in a very different time. It's this fundamental reversal of what has happened between humans and Earth systems. So let's get started with the scientific message. I'm going to show you 3 slides that represent well over a 200 man years or women years of work by scientists from an organization that I was leading before I came to Penn State, called Future Earth. The first slide is called the Great Acceleration. And you don't have to worry if you can't see the actual charts. There's only one lesson out of these charts. So what I have put up over there is a tracking from 1750 to 2010. All the horizontal axis, this is 1750 to 2010. That's the period that we are measuring. And this study measures over 300 variables. Half of them are social and human variables. The other half are Earth system variables. So on the left-hand side, you see the human or socioeconomic variables. And these include things like population, world population, real GDP, foreign direct investment, urban population, primary energy use, fertilizer consumption, paper production, water use, large dams, etc. And I've just got a sampling of these. On the right-hand side, you see Earth system trends. What is happening to carbon dioxide, to ozone depletion, to water depletion, to surface temperatures, to ocean acidification, coastal nitrogen. And again, I've just picked up less than a dozen variables from out of several hundred. And I want you to notice the one trend that is common across this. Somewhere around the 1950s, which is marked in red, there is this spike. Things started changing around the 1950s. Things that were going steadily for over 1 million years in terms of Earth system variables started to see the spike, largely driven by the immense population growth after the 2 world wars, which resulted in human consumption and increasing consumption. But things have changed in virtually everything that we are doing to the Earth. And the extent of this change is now considered by scientists that the continued functioning of the Earth system as it has been supported for thousands of years is at risk. The extent of this risk is captured in this study, which is also a very famous study around what are called planetary boundaries. For humans to live on Earth, there are 9 planetary boundaries that scientists have been tracking. Out of those 9, 2 of them are already in the red zone. The biosphere integrity, or the chemical physical composition of the Earth, is already in the red zone. And the second one that is in the red zone is nitrogen in the Earth. So all the fertilizers that we put in and that washes into the waterways and causes acidification. For 2 other boundaries on climate change and land system change, we are in the yellow zone, which is sort of a danger zone. And some of the boundaries, like novel entities that are now in the atmosphere, we don't have any good quantification, so we can't judge. So I label them as NGQ, no good quantification. Doesn't mean we are safe on them. We might have exceeded them. When you imagine that in 1950, when the chemical industry started, there were 3,000 chemicals in circulation commercially. Today there are over 3 million chemicals in circulation, of which less than 1% have had ecological, toxicological testing done on them. So we are producing stuff, we are putting it into the air, we are putting it into the land, we are putting it into the water without really realizing what these chemicals are doing to our own bodies. So we are exceeding planetary boundaries, and then we are exceeding financial boundaries. The way we are living today is clearly not sustainable, and we are living literally in debt to future generations. And this is an important fact, because when I come to the definition of sustainability, I will talk about this intergenerational question as being at the heart of sustainability. So the global debt today is about $233 trillion, 2017, on a global GDP of $80 trillion. So 4 times, almost 3 times of what we are producing on an annual basis. I know GDP is an imperfect measure. The global debt measure is also very imperfect. It doesn't count many things. But despite all those imperfections, the fact is we are living beyond our means. Individual families are in debt. Institutions are in debt. Governments are in debt. Virtually every government on municipal, state, federal level, worldwide is in debt. Think about this for a moment. This is not a financially sustainable thing. And this is not even a situation in which a good economist today would be willing to lend you money under these conditions if you were so indebted. If we started repaying this debt at a 3% interest rate, it would take us a century to overcome the debt. So we are living, besides the debt, we are living in extreme inequality financially. All of you have seen numbers about who controls the wealth in the world today. 0.7% of the population of the world owns 47% of the world's asset. And the latest study by Oxfam actually says it's not even 0.7%, because that would be a pretty big number if you take a population of 7 billion people. It is literally 8 individuals whose net worth is equivalent to 50% of the poorest people in the world. And about 1.6 billion people are living in what is called multidimensional poverty. Not just under $2 a day, but sometimes poverty is in terms of their access to health care, their access to education, their access to services, of social services of other types. Okay, so we have a situation in which we are over-consuming, and we are over-consuming in a very lopsided manner. The bad news now is that this is not over. We have a population of 7 billion people on Earth that is going to go to 10 billion people before it stabilizes, and everybody has an aspiration to meet at least their basic needs in terms of food, water, income, education, resilience on what's on the inside of this. And on the outside is the planetary boundaries. So we know now that we know the global problematic. The global problem is that on spaceship Earth, we have to manage 10 billion people and their aspirations in a way that we don't destroy the Earth systems, and yet meet the needs, the basic needs, without creating false securities of debt and borrowing from future generations. This phenomenon is what I'm calling the Anthropocene, which many scientists are studying, and geologists are saying that when future generations dig through the soil to test what characterized a particular society, this era from the 1950s onwards is going to be seen as the Anthropocene, because plastic will be the most predominant micromolecule in the stratification of the Earth. So this is where we are headed. Anthropocene is a period in which human impacts are now driving the hydrological cycle, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the phosphate cycle. What we used to call nature does not actually exist. Nature is what we are making out of nature. To me, this is a very fundamental point of discontinuity for humans. And you can look at the scientific data behind this. I've tried to summarize, as I said, hundreds of years of research into 3 slides. There is tons more data behind this that you can go to look at the scientific argument behind it. That we are now at a point of disjuncture that we as humans and our decisions determine what nature will be. So does that put us in a special place of responsibility? I would argue that this changes everything. We cannot continue to live in the sort of innocence that we did in most of the post-industrial revolution period. The enemy, as Pogo said, is us. And we are the ones who are going to fix it, if anyone. We are the dominant species on Earth. If you just took by weight living species on Earth, humans would constitute about 4% of the mass. 70% of the mass on Earth is today in the form of cattle that we keep in farms for our food. And about 16% is in the form of wild animals and other animals. So we are not only the dominant species, other species are living to be our food. And it should give us pause to think about our responsibility not only to ourselves and to our future generations, but to creation as a whole. As President Gormley pointed out earlier in the encyclical Laudato Si, Pope's own request for us to be thinking about our home. So I think there is a case to be made, and I'll come back to that encyclical in a moment. But let me say that I don't want to spend all my 45 minutes giving you the bad news. The good news is that we have solutions. And we've had solutions for a long time. And I'm going to characterize these solutions under this umbrella of sustainability and sustainable development. So the concept of sustainability has been around since managed forests emerged in Europe, in Germany particularly, because there were kings and noblemen who wanted to save European civilization by providing enough wood to be burnt into in the industrial furnaces and in the steam engines that were powering Europe's development. So Karl von Karlowitz, in his book Silvicultura Economica, for the first time talked about sustainable yields in forestry. How do you take out of nature only that much that allows nature to replenish itself and survive on its own? How do we not intervene in those natural cycles and keep our consumption to levels that are sustainable? St. Francis of Assisi had insights even before the Germans put it to industrial use. He talked about care for our common earth, care for animals, care for other species. So I think in many traditions around the world, there have been seeds of sustainability thinking. It is not some new idea that got cooked up in the 1980s and later. I just want to point out there are discourses in science, in the social sciences and humanities, in the arts, in faith-based traditions that have precursed this idea of sustainability. The one report that I want to point out very specifically is the Club of Rome work, which was in 1970s in a book called Limits to Growth. They pointed out that if humans don't change their pattern of consumption, we are going to run into a direct clash, a conflict with nature, and we are going to destroy and collapse civilizations. And it was not a very popular message in 1970s. It is even less popular today, except the Club of Rome has come out with a 2018 report which squarely blames our system of economics as a global capitalist system as where some of the fault lies. And I'll come back to this theme again in a little while. So sustainability and sustainable development to me are all about balance, an intergenerational balance between our needs and our desire to fulfill our needs without jeopardizing the needs of future generations. This is a definition of sustainability that comes directly from Our Common Future, which was the Brundtland Commission report that came out in the 1980s. It is also a balance between humans and nature, as I said. We, as a dominant species, have a responsibility to ensure that other species can also flourish and not destroy them into extinction. And finally, it is about economic balance. The idea of inequality that I mentioned is very much at the heart of sustainability. So for the last almost 30 years, this debate on sustainability has been going on, and almost a discipline of sustainability science has been formed. The organization Future Earth, that I will talk about a little bit more, that I was running, is got 50,000 scientists that work on sustainability sciences. They include everything from agriculture to energy to food, water, biodiversity, oceans, and what have you. So it's become a big arena, but it has lacked a kind of concretization that would allow institutions and individuals to be able to really dig into it. And so there have been a lot of academic debates, and there have been a lot of United Nations reports, and there are many institutions that have talked about it until, I'll come to this after I do this one, until in 2015, an agreement was reached among 197 nations that the leaders of these nations agree to pursuing something called Sustainable Development Goals. This is, to me, a watershed in many ways. I can't think of a single agreement in human history where all the nations come together and say we want to move in a particular direction. That itself is quite unique. But something that is even more unique than that is what they have agreed to are goals that are quite concrete and measurable. Each of these goals has 3 or 4 indicators of what that goal means, and each of those indicators has a few metrics. So if you wanted to measure the goals of no poverty, and just look at the list of goals, there are 17 of them: no poverty, no hunger, good health, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, good jobs, economic growth, innovation, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities, responsible consumption, climate action, life underwater, life on land, peace and justice partnerships. So first thing I want to say is sustainability is not about the environment alone. Only 5 of those goals are about the environment. The remaining 12 goals are really social, they're technological, they're economic, they're cultural. In many universities, including my own university, Penn State, the dominant understanding of sustainability has been environmental. It's about the green stuff. So these goals point out that it's not just the green stuff. It is the melding of the green and the brown. It is how we are going to live with nature. I also want to point out these goals are supposed to be universal. That means they are designed or being thought of for the whole planet. It's not just the third world or developing countries where there is hunger. We have hunger in the United States. We have hunger in Pennsylvania. We have hunger in Pittsburgh. We have hunger in State College, University Park. We have hunger among students. We have hunger among staff. We have hunger amongst our community members. When we opened the Lion Pantry, we got users from all across the spectrum. So we have to think about these goals in terms of what they mean to our communities, but we have also got to imagine them in terms of being universal and for the rest of the world. They are interdependent with each other. They're not supposed to be silos. They're not supposed to be working independently. Each goal is interdependent. And there are trade-offs and synergies. There are real conflicts in these goals. This is not being proposed as a mechanism that everybody will understand, everybody will agree to. To do one goal, you might have to suffer or pull back on another. So we need to have this on the table with an open agenda to discuss how we are going to pursue these goals, what are we going to give up in order to pursue the other goals that we want to pursue. Okay, I want to also go back to this moral case for sustainability. After making the scientific argument that sustainability is needed, it is not really an option. It is not really something that you might be a skeptic about. You might want to believe or not believe in climate change. That's not really a choice. Science is saying that this is real, it is happening, there are fundamental changes to the Earth system. But at the same time, we have a moral argument that has been very cogently made by Pope Francis in Laudato Si, which will be expanded upon tomorrow by Mary Evelyn Tucker and some of the other speakers, to show that it encompasses many religions. This insight has been around, and I think Laudato Si to me as a scientist stands out as a document for scientific reasons, not just for faith-based reasons. The Pontifical Academies consulted with Future Earth and a global array of Nobel Prize winning scientists before the Pope announced Laudato Si. So this is also an interesting document because it brings science and faith together in a very unique message, and certainly a message that would reverberate with the audience in this university. And I think the Pope is very more blunt than science usually is. And I know that President Gormley had said we should be polite and make a civil discourse. But I think the Pope is very clear about where he places the blame for what is happening on Earth today. Relentless exploitation and destruction of the environment caused by apathy, reckless pursuit of profits, excessive faith in technology, and political short-sightedness. I don't think he's sparing anybody. So there's a deep message over here that binds well with the scientific message to hopefully create a groundswell of movement towards sustainability by institutions and by governments. Okay, so what does this Anthropocene mean for universities? We are in a university. Many of you are from university backgrounds. I certainly have spent 40 years of my professional career at universities. And I think of universities as having special responsibility to address this global and epochal human challenge. On the left, I have listed what universities do, what they have done historically. Universities were formed out of this need for enlightenment, and they have valued production of knowledge or research as the primary thing that they do. They are the new Brahmins, the pundits who know everything. They are the scientific experts. And regardless of whether you are a big institution or a small institution, left is approximately the kind of priority that universities currently reflect. Research, teaching, service, student life, operations, and facilities. Now, I understand I'm kind of painting all universities in a monolith. In some universities, teaching is more valued. I taught at Bucknell University, where teaching was considered to be the primary reason. Perhaps Duquesne has a different ordering of that. But by and large, big universities, research universities around the world are getting driven by research, teaching, service in that order. So the first thing I want to say about the Anthropocene is that universities need to rethink this prioritization. And this prioritization is not just what happens in the strategic plans, it is what happens in the allocation of budgets, in the design of reward systems, in the way our nuts and bolts operations work. So we need to rethink what universities in the Anthropocene need to prioritize in order to solve the challenges of sustainability. And I would argue that what needs to come to the top is community engagement. Some of it happens today in the form of service. Some of it also happens through operations and facilities. But community engagement as the place where service to the community happens is the first area of priority in my view. And I will explain each of these 5 areas: operations as living labs, enlivening teaching, impassioning student life, and sustainability research the next, I'm about halfway through my prepared remarks. So I'm going to spend one slide on each one of them to explain to you what I mean by these things, and then you can try to interpret these for your own context and see how this can be reconstituted, how universities of the Anthropocene can look if we reconstituted them to do things that we have done before, but to do them with a purpose, to do them with a strategic intent. So community engagement, the engaged university. University is not something that needs to sit outside of the community and form its own little community juxtaposed to what's going on in real life. Sustainability requires solving real problems on the ground. Every community has sustainability challenges, and they need those challenges solved, and those challenges are not being addressed because every single challenge that is being documented over the last 50 years has actually become worse for most communities. And it's not just in the third world. If you're worried about the quality of water and what's happening to it, you have to look at the quality of water in Chesapeake Bay over the last 40 years, which has eliminated certain types of fishing and crabbing and all kinds of activities because of the nutrient load that is getting into the Chesapeake Bay out of farm flows and stormwater flows. So the challenges are everywhere, and we need to be able to solve the problems, and universities need to see themselves as the instruments of the changes that need to happen in communities. I put down the seal of Duquesne University over here because looking at your website, talking to Robert and to David Wasilewski, with whom I'm in the process of writing a book, and to Jerry and others, I'm realizing that Duquesne is already doing a lot of this, and partly because community is in Duquesne's DNA as a Spiritan organization that was formed originally to train people to solve community problems. It is a university community engagement model that I think many other universities, including mine, can emulate. In Anthropocene, communities need universities to participate in solving problems around climate, food, water, energy, and resilience. These are topics that science has identified as being critical in the coming years, and I'll come to what each of these topics involves when I talk about the research part. We also need to make universities more open. Perhaps that's not such a big problem at Duquesne, but in a university that I represent, Penn State, we have a budget of $5.6 billion. That is more than the GDP of 40 countries. And we are running this budget across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We operate everything from power plants to water systems to police departments to airports to what have you. We literally are a country. And being so big also gives us an opportunity to solve the problems in the communities that we serve. We serve 24 communities in Pennsylvania, including a small presence in Pittsburgh. But we are also the most obtuse and ununderstandable place in Pennsylvania. It is very hard for outsiders to get in and figure out where are the experts, what are the projects, what is happening. So we need to find pathways for communities to come to us. Otherwise, we are going to remain isolated. We've got these invisible walls that almost scare the community away. There are some formal occasions, there are some town-gown relations, efforts are being made, there are good intentions behind it, but by and large, we are an institution that is not so easily understandable, even in the communities that we exist. Service orientation, humility, and respect for outsiders. And by that I mean that in the Anthropocene, you cannot take for granted that the knowledge resides only among the experts in universities. The world outside there would not be happening if it were to depend only on our knowledge. And we need to have the humility to understand that there is working knowledge out there that can help solve problems. We can probably bring some things together. We have the convening power. We have the power to perhaps provide some expertise, but we need to be much more humble in what we recommend to others, because otherwise what we end up doing is reproducing the system. And I'll give you a very small example of just last month I met with the governor of the state of Igbo in Nigeria, who wants to make his state a food basket for the region. And he came to Penn State because Penn State has the big agricultural college. We were a land-grant university with, I think, top 4 universities in agricultural research. And then he went around looking at other parts of the university, and he realized that what his state needs is not the research that is going on in agriculture, it's the extension service. Because that is where his farmers are. They don't need new biogenetic research on the latest stuff that is going on. They need basic stuff. And up till then, our administration was saying, oh, and the way to make a partnership with this governor and governorate in Nigeria is to pitch our highest class research. So we ourselves don't understand what the world needs. And the world coming to the table to us, we kind of misplace our own expertise because we have in our head a mindset that says agricultural research is where we are good at and that's what we are going to sell. Okay, moving on to operations. As I said, Penn State has a huge operation, but every university has got operations which need to be turned into what I call living labs. The idea that operations can be the venue for research and teaching. They are not just a service that can be provided to the university, whether it's electricity or whether it is food. There is a learning opportunity in each of those areas. And we need to systematically design student engagement and give them experiences of running the university, so to say, in some way or fashion. It also implies turning our research on ourselves. I had a conversation last week with the head of the data sciences professor, the person who leads it, and he had come to us requesting a connection to companies from where he could get data. I asked him what kind of data are you looking for. He said, oh, any data would be fine. We could use like electrical load data, we could use water flow data, we could use. So I asked him, can you use data that we have produced within the university? We have been running a dam on University Park for 35 years under Pennsylvania jurisdiction, which requires us to metricize and measure everything about the water flowing through it. We have electricity data for over 100 years and into the next 50 years because we are doing our own projection. Could you use that? And it kind of lit a light bulb in him that we have data that we go out and ask, because that's just the way research gets done. We go outside for data. It doesn't have to be that way. If we learn more about ourselves, if we can turn research on ourselves, we will be able to improve our operations, we will be able to give our students more experiences and diverse experiences, everything from cooking food to managing waste to running airports to running a police force or what have you. So converting our operations into living labs is the other big turn for universities that needs to happen. Enlivening teaching, curriculum and sustainability. So this is something that I'm using the word enliven deliberately. And I want to juxtapose it with enlightenment. Enlivenment is about bringing life back in. We have been so influenced by enlightenment as a core value in academia that we do most of our teaching in the head. And we believe that if we can improve people's thinking, we will somehow change everything. Well, I think human experience is more than what happens in the head. It also happens in our hands and in our hearts. And we need to produce a kind of education that is more holistic than just what happens in the brain. So enlivening courses, enlivening what we do in class and out of class, particularly outside the class. Most students spend more time outside the class than within the class, and there are more opportunities for personal growth, for community engagement outside the class. So we really need to rethink the curriculum. We need to rethink both the mode of teaching, and we need to rethink what content we are teaching. Otherwise, we are reproducing knowledge in the mold of the pre-Anthropocene era, and we are going to reproduce the same mistakes that we have been doing for 200 years. If the Anthropocene disjuncture, if this discontinuity is going to be turned into a positive, it will only be by teaching people other things and other ways of doing things. Also want to say something about affordability, maybe primarily because this is something that is top of mind at Penn State. Our Board of Trustees has gone outside the normal channels and hired an affordability task force. But it is also because of what I see in higher education, a completely untenable financial situation. Families having to, on the average, take $75,000 in loan to get a child through school. And we know what the effects of this are. They affect the poor people more than they affect the middle class and the upper classes. And given that the middle class has sort of been at the same level of real income for the last 40 years, even for middle class it is not an affordable proposition anymore. So there is serious thought that needs to be given by the Board of Trustees, by the upper administration, by the strategic planners at universities on how the affordability question is going to be addressed. Impassioning student life. I've been at Penn State only for 1 year and 2 months now. There are lots of good things happening at Penn State in sustainability, but the two that I am most amazed by are both driven by student energy. Students somehow existentially get this idea that they are at risk and they need to change things. So the two things that I will mention to you, one is that we have a student farm, which is literally an operation completely handed over to students. And it's an amazing place because you not only grow food over there, you grow community, you grow people, you grow leaders, and the program is designed with very light touch and support from the operations and facilities people, and some general guidance from the agricultural rural sociology faculty. But it is really driven by a bunch of passionate students who want to take responsibility, who want to take things into their hands. And they are not afraid of anybody. They are literally going out there and creating a piece of land where food is grown. They sell it. They've got the economics worked out. They've got the agriculture worked out. They've got the institutional logic worked out. And the 2-year pilot experiment is now being made permanent by doubling the size of the farm and giving them some more resources to do more of it. And the second one is a showcase that students proposed, designed, developed, and are executing. And it's a showcase of ideas. The basic theme of it is, what's your big idea for sustainability? They invite worldwide scholars, professors, cooks, quacks, chefs, what have you, to come in and explain how they would solve some sustainability challenge. And they build it around food, and they have a conversation about that idea. And it is so popular that not only are they always sold out, the conversations that come out of that get fed into academic programs, they get fed into operations, they get fed into community programs, and something that both the students learn from and the rest of university learns from. I feel that students want an education that is more holistic. There are lots of academic surveys that show this, that students do not see themselves as narrow technocrats at a university only to study a narrow technical subject. They want to grow up as human beings, and especially in the traditional age group of 18 to 22-year-olds. Their spiritual education is virtually absent in many universities, perhaps not in faith-based universities, but in other secular places. It is not really developed. A big UCLA survey a few years ago pointed that out as the one thing that almost 80% of the students complained about, was that their other needs beyond the narrow intellectual needs were not being taken care of. So we need to engage in that student life, empower students with what I call tempered infiltration of what goes on in universities. Students are probably the lowest end of the power totem pole in universities, unfortunately, and they are the ones who have some of the most brilliant ideas and the energy and the spirit to do things. So I think the University of the Anthropocene needs to revalue this resource and figure out how they're going to use students in more productive ways. And then finally, the sustainability research question. This is probably, as a university audience, one that is probably most familiar to you. I just want to point out a couple of things about what needs to change in the Anthropocene around university research. And I'll begin with the way I see the state of knowledge in the 21st century. In the 12th century, I was telling Robert, when the first university was founded, there were 4 disciplines: theology, music, law, and the arts. By 1800s, when universities in Europe were being founded, there were 56 disciplines. In 1952, when the British government started keeping a track of subjects, there were 1,750 some disciplines. Today, the National Science Register of Disciplines lists 8,430 some disciplines. And that's just in the United States. And it doesn't include any of the 4 colleges that you have on campus here. Doesn't include business, doesn't include education, doesn't include law, doesn't include healthcare. These are not considered disciplines by the establishment. If you add all the disciplines from around the world in all the NSFs of the G20 nations, there are upwards of 15,000 disciplines in which each narrow discipline, there is money, there are journals, there are PhDs, there are programs. At a time when we need a holistic understanding of the planet, at a time when we need this integrated view and vision of the world, and we are stuck in this model, which is a 300-year-old way of looking at knowledge, breaking it down, and the effort is to break it down even further. So we need to move from this disciplinary space to an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and beyond. And that beyond space I call the transdisciplinary, where the problem to be solved is not in the discipline. The problem to be solved is beyond the discipline. It's in the real world. All the problems of sustainability are in the real world. And if we only keep on measuring the problem, which is what we have been doing in sustainability sciences for 50 years, we will have finer and finer metrics and measures, and the problem will become worse and worse. So we need to move to a more transdisciplinary space. In terms of content, I'm going to put down over here the results of a conference that we organized at Future Earth in 2014 called the Future Earth 2025 Vision that listed 8 areas in which research needs to be done. And I'll read out just a couple of them to give you a sense of what they're trying to get at. Okay, the first one is deliver water, energy, and food for all and manage the synergies and trade-offs among them by understanding how these interactions are shaped by environmental, economic, social, and political changes. At one level, it looks like pretty trite. But at another level, what this way of framing the question of food, water, and energy is saying that you can't separate these domains. Food is water. There is virtual water in every food that you eat. There is virtual energy in every food that you eat. And energy itself is virtual water. And when you do these things in silos, you miss the point. And you might improve the food performance, but you will miss out on the water performance. Precisely what has been happening in Pennsylvania. We are an agricultural breadbasket in some ways, and we also have the most polluted river in terms of nitrogen nutrient loading, because we don't consider food and water in a connected way in our policies. So each of these 8 areas are written in this interconnected fashion to say that we can't study things in these individual silos. We need to look at interdependencies, interconnections, the synergies and the trade-offs in all areas, from decarbonization to safeguarding terrestrial freshwater and marine natural assets, to building healthy communities, to promoting sustainable rural futures to feed rising and more affluent populations, improving human health, encouraging sustainable consumption and production, increasing social resilience to future threats and extreme events. Okay, I'm going to bring this to, I've got 2-minute signal over here. So in conclusion, I started by arguing that the Anthropocene as an era marks a discontinuity in human nature relations. This is a fundamental thing. It will take some time to absorb this insight, if you will, that has come from many, many years of science and scientific studies. It calls for universities, which have been the big engines of knowledge production, to rethink their purpose and how they are going to deal with their main stakeholders of students, communities, faculty, trustees, businesses, etc. And I see this both as a moment of need and an opportunity for universities. Some universities are really changing things around. Big universities in the United States, in Europe, just to give you 2 examples, Arizona State University, with Michael Crow arriving 10 years ago from Columbia University to Arizona State, has completely turned that university on its head. He's made a lot of enemies. He's not the most popular guy, but he has recreated that university as a transdisciplinary organization. In Europe, there is a university called the Lufana University of Sustainability, which is a state university, which has done away with traditional departments altogether and is moving into rebuilding the university. So it can be done. And I know that Duquesne is already doing many things in a kind of episodic way or based on the interests of individual faculty. I know Robert's work, I know David's work, and several of you here in the room from the ecological and environmental sciences are already doing things. It is time for Duquesne to be a leader by moving this at an institutional level, embedding it into their strategic plans, having their stakeholders engage in this dialogue, and be a leader for the rest of us. Thank you very much.
One of the things I like so much about this conference and this opportunity to engage is it's really about that. It is an opportunity to engage. Where you have questions, and first Paul will try to respond to those, and I can try to help us watch the time along with Jerry. But this is one of the things that he purposely wants to make us do in this type of environment. Not to be passive and sit there and take information, but also ask how we can apply this or what this means to us. Because thinking I didn't need the microphone, but just in case I do, we'll have one that circulates for everyone else. So thank you so much, Paul, for the information and the enlightening opportunity to think about this again, to always take a step back, listen to what others are trying to do and what they are doing in their accomplishments, and to think about how we could do that here locally. So with all the different opportunities that we have in the room in terms of who you represent, I want to open the floor to questions. I'm sure I can come up with some, but I'm probably the last person you want to hear from asking Paul questions about my take on this. Instead, I want to hear from all of you. So I think we have about a half an hour or so of time for this. And in doing that, please take the initiative to stand up. We'll get a microphone to you, or if you can, just raise your hand and ask a question from a seating position. Yes, please. Microphone's behind you.
Hi, my name's Professor Jennifer Bates from the Philosophy Department, and I'll be active tomorrow morning as well. Thank you for your talk. There's so much that's fantastic in it, but there's also, I hope I can put this in an articulate way so that you can really get it, but I'm alarmed. I'm going to put it in an extreme, just so you can get it. I'm alarmed by the call for reinventing the university. Because one of the courses I teach is the philosophy of the environment, and some of the lectures that I'm giving are based on texts like Aldo Leopold's The Land Ethic, in which what we should be doing is looking at the ecological richness and biodiversity and complexity, which I'm sure you'd agree with. And what alarms me is the idea that we can go into a university and get rid of the 8,000 different disciplines and replace it with a utilitarian special interests that are, admittedly I agree with, sustainability is good, but special interest groups are scary in other ways, and the one good thing that universities have given us since the 14th century is something that can quietly in libraries look at what matters to humans and what should matter beyond what is human. And I worry that we're going to end up with something where everybody's just doing a whole lot of different things under the same idea of sustainability and not getting that quiet, careful analysis that universities are famous for. So I'm thinking you need better government, reinvention of the relationship between government and private citizens. The universities are great and they can be opened up, but don't get rid of the disciplines and the multiplicity of disciplines any more than you would get rid of the land and its complexities and diversities. You don't want a parking lot. You don't want malls. You want diversity. So that kind of, I hope you can get what I'm saying. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for that question. And so first, let me say that my intention is not to get rid of all disciplines. I think we need fundamental knowledge, we need new knowledge. Disciplines do serve a purpose there, but just pursuing knowledge in those disciplines is not going to solve the problems that we face across the world. And it has not solved those problems in the period that this new knowledge has exploded. In the last 50 years, we have actually become worse at every single sustainability metric that we now measure well. And I think this is a realization that the science funding bodies actually came to first. In 2012, at Rio Plus 20, they assessed what is the state of knowledge and what is needed for the Earth to survive in this period of disjuncture and discontinuity. And their conclusion was that it is never going to be sufficient to continue to do the kind of work that we have done in the past. We need to do some of that, and there are some researchers that will probably continue to work in disciplines. But if we don't find that overarching integrative framework to pulling these together and understanding planetary scale challenges and doing something about it, then that knowledge is futile in some ways. And the reason why Future Earth was created, before Future Earth there were several programs that had been running under a disciplinary umbrella to continue to understand Earth systems. And they were measuring everything about oceans, about river systems, about mountain systems, about desert systems, about agriculture, about energy, etc. And the NSFs of these G20 nations, they came together and said, we need some of that knowledge, but that's not sufficient. We know that there are problems in each one of these systems that are not being solved. And science has to change and become more integrative. So it's not so much as abandoning the disciplines completely, or you can't integrate if you have nothing to integrate. So I think you need to do some of the disciplinary work, but that disciplinary work alone is not going to solve the problem. So there has to be a shift in my view. The second reaction I have is around this question of utilitarian, that this is an argument for utilitarian values superseding all other forms of value. I don't intend, and perhaps in my shorthand over here it came through as a overly utilitarian argument, but I do think that the way we understand usefulness and utility is itself worth re-examining, particularly in the context of the inequalities that the world is now saddled with. So what becomes very utilitarian for one group, for one type of organization, maybe a corporation or a few individuals, is intensely non-useful for many others. So it's not blind utilitarianism that I'm advocating over here, but perhaps a plea for a more nuanced understanding of utilitarianism. And yes, there are some practical problems that eventually have to be addressed. We are simply destroying, even though we have very sensitive writings on by environmental philosophers and by ecologists around the world, the species extinction record over the same period that we've been trying to do this quietly and in university libraries, our record is abysmal. We are destroying more species than we know exist. We don't understand them fully. So I think, to me, a call to change universities is, I made it particularly provocative because I see universities as the place that can match the need of the times. I don't think this problem of sustainability can be solved by governments, because as I pointed out earlier, virtually all governments are running deficits. They don't have the resources. I don't think it's going to be solved by corporations, because it doesn't fit into business logic to a degree that will solve the problem. Universities have the intellectual resources. They can garner community engagement and stakeholder resources to be helpful. So yes, perhaps it's a bold call to redo the university, and it's probably more a beacon pointing a direction rather than a regimented plan to destroy current universities altogether. Mary Evelyn.
I wanted to just enter the discussion where Professor Bates was raising some interesting points, and just make this, I don't have a solution to this, but I would say a place like Duquesne has a great opportunity to bring together what Professor Bates was saying and what Paul was saying in this way. As Jerry was speaking about at dinner, the shift from a bioethics center to a global health center is exactly along the lines of what you're speaking about. That bioethics can't only be for humans and hospitals and health care, but we have to have a bioethics for the biosphere. And I think that very forward-looking perspective is what we're talking about. Yeah. And I would also just say that the opportunity for religiously based institutions, as you pointed out, is great here. But I would also say that I'm a historian of world religions and so on, but I would say philosophy departments and religion departments and ethics have not yet entered this discussion in a significant way, apart from perhaps what Professor Bates is teaching. But in conferences I go to nationally and internationally, ethics, religion, and so on are way out the door. Teaching at Yale, at the School of the Environment, that is absolutely the case. And in most of higher education, we're talking about secular institutions. So that is why I think your argument is hugely important, because at a school like ours, science and policy, economics, law, and technology are going to solve these problems. Ethics and religion have nothing to do with it. So unless we de-siloize our universities to a great degree that says the problems we are solving are much greater than the disciplines out of which we come, much less our CVs. If we heard the talks at a school like Yale every single week on the incredibly dangerous boundaries that we are on, that you presented, we would all be on the edge of despair. And that's also what our students are facing. So I applaud what you have put together, and I think it's absolutely essential, especially because you, and we've had a friend for a long time, understand the ethical and moral and spiritual base. So I thank you, Paul, for what you've done.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm really pleased about the centrality of ethics in this conversation. And I agree this is a very rare thing. And one of the integrative moves that I have been participating in, and I run this center that Robert mentioned on arts and sustainability. And the purpose of that center is premised on the idea that science alone is not going to solve the problem of sustainability. Science is probably equally a contributor to the problem of sustainability with technology and extreme technocratic consciousness that it has promoted. And arts as a vehicle, and humanities and ethics tied in as a vehicle for engaging human emotions and emotionally reconnecting humans with nature. That is at least a significant part of the challenge that we face. So the role for a Spiritan organization, for a faith-based organization are huge, and the role that they can play, to me, is more pivotal than the role traditional scientifically driven university can play. I mean, I look at my own university and I see these world-class scholars, and they are interesting in what they do within their silos, but as human beings, they are so constrained inside that silo. And it is sometimes sad to see this, that science is so seductive in its own rewards and fruits that it can contain you within the disciplinary conversation in very seductive ways. And getting out of it and becoming a whole human being with an ethical dimension and a human dimension as a critical part of it is really the call I'm trying to make. Thank you.
Thank you for your talk. You mentioned animal agriculture a little bit, and animal agriculture is highly implicated in species extinction, deforestation, water use, land use. According to the UN, animal agriculture contributes more to global climate change than the entire transportation sector combined. That's airplanes, cars, and a fact that is really astonishing to me is that currently there is enough crops produced to feed the entire global population right now, but so many crops are fed to animals for animal agriculture, and I was curious to hear your opinion on veganism and vegetarianism and how individuals can make a big change by adopting a vegan lifestyle of avoiding animal products in their diet.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. It's a very profound question. And having grown up in a culture which for thousands of years has largely remained vegetarian, I'm talking about the Southeast Asian culture, I know that it is possible to grow societies, healthy and culturally vibrant societies, without having to resort to the kind of diets that modern humans globally, including South Asians, including myself, are now participating in. At the same time, I think it is a very difficult change to completely move people from where they are to veganism or even to vegetarianism. I think we have to articulate a pathway in which people see not only the ecological burden that animal-based diets cause, but also the cruelty to the animals and the way they are now produced industrially. And between those ecological arguments and cruelty arguments, I think there's a good case to be made for all of us to rethink diets. I think it has to happen in an evolutionary and incremental way, and I don't think it can be something that science can dictate to people, because diets and cuisines themselves are forms of culture that have survived for thousands of years. They have become embedded in our own DNA and the way our body reacts to foods. But I think certainly there is need for more science, and there's perhaps even more need for ethics in rethinking what future diets are going to be. There are a few developments in science that I am very intrigued by. There is a company that's called Beyond Meat. I don't know if any of you have heard about it. They actually serve a vegetarian burger at TGI Fridays now, and they're also sold in Giant and several other food stores. But their whole business model is based on mushroom pulses, lentils-based protein that fulfills both our taste needs, also our nutrition needs. So I think there are some successes emerging from science, but there's a fundamental reflection that needs to happen on part of every individual. And I think the opportunity again over here is tremendous. You don't have to become a vegan or a vegetarian overnight. You can have less meat before you go meatless. And then you can have a meatless Monday or a meatless Tuesday. And there are many other programs that both institutions and individual families are putting into place. At Penn State, we have deliberately put this question on the table for the strategic planning committee. Our food and dining services is now being tasked with figuring out options to meat-based foods that are equally financially viable for a open menu serving that we do. We feed 40,000 meals per day within the Penn State system. It is a big question. We are working with a number of companies, and I think the science on this is actually quite clear. It is ecologically senseless. The amount of resources we consume, we need to produce meat and protein that way versus protein through just plant-based thing is just 100 times different. So I think the scientific data is in. The institutional and the personal questions still need to be resolved, and we can't force those on people. So I believe that thoughtful people are starting to sort of address this on their own. But thank you for bringing up that very important question.
Hi, I'm a senior here, and I have two things. So one, from the previous question, I feel like this world is never going to be fully vegan or go towards vegetarianism unless the economy makes it feasible for people. I could go vegan, but I don't have the budget to do so, or the resources in Pittsburgh to do that. My question is, what is your advice for students who are on campuses who still view students as children and therefore cannot make any sort of steps or application of this information? Recently, the recycling bins were taken out of many buildings on this campus, and then they were put back in, but with regulation. So it was only paper, cardboard, and things that have not touched food or drink. So now I'm in a place where I have to look for places to put to-go containers or water bottles or whatever, whereas that was not the case 2 months ago. And of course, everything is revolved around money, but what can I do in that standpoint? Can I demand the university to put better sustainable resources on this campus to recycle when money is the center of most steps that are taken by institutions?
Yeah, so I think this whole question of recycling is actually a very complex question, particularly at an institutional level. Because the way the system works is the institution adopts certain policies and makes certain types of utensils and recycling infrastructure, puts it into place. And then that material is collected and consolidated and it is sold into markets, recycling markets, most of which happen to be, or a large part of them happen to be in China and in South Asia and in Africa and less developed part of the world where things get cleaned up and reused and recycled, etc. These markets are shifting all the time. And they're partly shifting because of the kind of waste that is getting produced over here. Much of the waste that is now produced here is contaminated. Even though we have different receptacles for different things, people don't pay attention. And ultimately the markets realize that it's more difficult to clean up and recover this material. So the market shifts, and once the market shifts, it has kind of a backwash effect to these institutions. So we are, at Penn State, we have your problem of Duquesne probably multiplied 100-fold just because of our size of 99,000 student bodies that we are managing. And it is virtually impossible to tackle this task at an individual building level or at an individual school level. You have to do this institutionally, and you have to do this in partnership with the recycling authority of your community and in partnership with supply chains in the recycling system. So it's a very complicated problem. You kind of see the front end of it and you see your choice is limited. But I don't have a very good solution of what individuals can do except use less materials in the first place. And this is, to me, an insight that is not fully appreciated. So now there are studies coming out about what we possess and what we actually use. And apparently in simple items like clothing, and this is an experiment you can go and do at home tonight, open up your closet, count the pieces of clothing that you have, and see how many of them you use on a regular basis. The national average is that 90% of clothing that is in people's drawers and closets doesn't get pulled out of the closet more than once a year. So we get used to certain types of clothes, we just wear those, we have 7 suits and 7 shirts and we do that, but we have probably 90 or 100 other pieces of clothing that never get out of it. So use, whether it is about clothing, whether it is about how you buy items. We have started within Penn State a program just 2 weeks ago called EcoCoin. EcoCoin is a physical coin that is left at the cash register, and if you agree to not take the plastic bag for what you have purchased, you can get an EcoCoin, and there are 3 boxes for 3 charities that are supported. You can drop that EcoCoin in there, and that charity will give 5 cents or 10 cents or whatever the value of that EcoCoin is. In the first month that they started this program, 200,000 plastic bags were returned or not used. And we have not even done this program across Penn State. It is currently being done only in dining halls and some of the convenience stores on campus. So when you get people to think about that there is a cost associated with it or there's a possibility of doing something, most of us are consuming things because we are not thinking. We are consuming on a kind of habitual automatic mode. So being more mindful and consuming less or questioning the consumption, and you can do that with plastics, you can do that with food, you can do that with clothes, you can do that with a lot of other things. So I'm sort of, my plea is for not waiting for the institutional recycling system to be perfected. That will probably take years and years, but doing something that is within your control what you take in. So if you choose carefully, you might be in a situation where you don't have to recycle as much. Yeah.
There are more questions, but I'm also been giving a time indication, so make sure we stay on time for the night so people can get to other things. So Paul, I want to thank you for this, and I'd like to close it out with one last brief question. With all that we've seen in the slides, all that we seem to think about a lot of times in terms of the environmental degradation and the things that are happening to the planet and to people, it tends to be overwhelming for many, right? We can really internalize and think mainly about the downside of this. Where are the things in this world that you look for or look to for inspiration, and maybe others could also look to help lift them in their times when this can be overwhelming?
Yeah, this is a very important question, the question of hope in the Anthropocene. Where is that hope going to come from? And I think for me personally, the arts have been the place for this inspiration, and it can be in science fiction of Douglas Adams, or it can be in movies, or it can be in music, or it can be in many forms of art. But I think humans have enormous capacities to understand their own well-being, and I think we kind of shortchange ourselves by relinquishing some of that thoughtfulness, some of that reflectiveness, and behaving more habitually and following the social cues and the cultural cues. So I think I want to I hope this is not a doom and gloom talk, and I hope that you all will in today's and tomorrow's conversation have more of a sense of hope that we as human beings are now given a new responsibility, and it requires us to rethink. And there are many different traditions and many different arenas of human activity that we can get knowledge from. If you are religiously inclined, I would ask people to read Laudato Si for inspiration. If you are artistically inclined, there are deep conversations in the arts where there is a possibility for inspiration. So let's not get on automatic thinking mode. Let us try to dig into these deep traditions and find how we are going to navigate the Anthropocene, because there is the choice of doing anything else is not there. We have to find our way out of this situation that we have put ourselves in.
Thank you. I know my answer to that question would have been to be here at the university, right? So thank you for being here with us at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, for a wonderful opening presentation, and Bob for facilitating the discussion. Thank you all for being here, for being a wonderful audience, so engaged. We start tomorrow at 9 o'clock, go all day, so look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And to our streaming community globally, you're probably up tomorrow morning already, many of you, so look forward to having you enjoy the conference from afar. Thank you all. Safe home tonight.